365 and get to know the team better. But we have, like I said, some team members that have volunteered to spend some time to share their experiences, their path to Microsoft. One of our keynote speakers this evening or this afternoon is actually someone that attended one of our HBCU Connect Microsoft events early on, pre-COVID, and then actually wasn't that first event, but we'll talk about his path after attending one of our events to end up working at Microsoft in program management. So this will be, I think, a special treat. And then let me see how we are on attendance. So Jesse, we can go ahead and start recording. I think it looks like you started.
Yep, we're good to go.
Okay, so everybody, first things first, like I said, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do me the favor of making sure you're on mute so we don't have any interruptions from our speakers this evening. Make sure you turn off your video. The only people I like on video will be the folks from Microsoft, the Microsoft team, as well as myself as a moderator. And then what I will do on your behalf is if you have questions, please ask your questions using the chat functionality within Microsoft Teams. Okay, so you can ask questions during the event. For the folks on the Microsoft team, if you're not presenting, I'll ask that you also interact with the candidates in the chat window within Microsoft Teams. So if you see a question that you can answer, feel free to answer that question. So Parul and Rob and Jesse and even Philip, if you're not speaking, feel free to interact in the chat with any questions that come through. But to the candidates, if you have questions, that you would like to kind of pose to the Microsoft panelists and a whole, we'll also have a live Q&A. So you'll be able to ask your questions in the chat, and then I will read those questions off from the chat and then ask those questions to the Microsoft team and panelists that have graciously, volunteered their time to answer. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for coming. But first things first, let me go over the agenda for today's event. So first things first, I'm going to give a welcome, introduce myself and my organization and how we partnered with Microsoft, kind of go into that background. Then I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Philip Drummer. And then after Philip speaks and gives the keynote, we're going to have a nice conversation with Philip and get his background and experiences. Then I'm going to introduce you to the team of panelists, like I said, that have volunteered their time to share their experiences and their roles and different opportunities within Microsoft 365. Then after I introduce each individual panelist, we will have a panel discussion where I have some questions that I like to ask of the team to bring out the Microsoft culture, to bring out the Microsoft 365, team culture, what it's like to work there, and just to ask some background questions related to what it's like to work for Microsoft, and even from a diversity perspective. So I'm going to ask those questions on your behalf in a panel discussion, and then we'll do a live Q&A where you all, as potential candidates that would like to interview with Microsoft and maybe land a job with Microsoft, you will be able to ask questions of our panelists that have volunteered their time this evening. So if you have some really good questions that you want to ask, make sure to save those questions for the live Q&A. But then if you have questions as we go, feel free to interact in the chat as well. And then the Microsoft team members that are here will help me out with answering those questions. All right, so after the live Q&A, then we'll pretty much end the event and give you the next steps for landing an interview with Microsoft 365. So for those that are on, make sure to mute your audio. Get a little bit of feedback. So if you would please mute your audio, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so let's get into it. Let me introduce myself. My name is Will Moss. A lot of you all are probably familiar with me, at least by name, because I have been sending out a lot of the communications to you all as candidates to present this opportunity to you, as well as other opportunities within Microsoft. So welcome. You are in really good hands. You're in the right place. If you'd like to learn more about what it's like to work for Microsoft, to learn more about Microsoft 365 specifically, because Microsoft is a huge company. There are lots of different opportunities. There's lots of different teams. And we're going to show you a little bit of that breakdown and then how Microsoft 365 sort of fits into that grand scheme of things. So you're in the right place to learn more. You're also in the right place if you want to learn, how you can land an interview with Microsoft and potentially join the team. So there's going to be, I think, some cool things that come out of our discussion tonight with the panelists. So really, I want you to take advantage of this opportunity to learn more, this opportunity to interact and ask questions. We don't have a really long list of speakers, so I think that presents us with the opportunity for us to get in more of your questions and have more conversations around things that you care about and things you might want to ask in order to better your chances of potentially landing a job with Microsoft. So this is a great opportunity for you from that aspect. But then also, let me tell you, Microsoft is a great company, that we really support because we've had a long-standing relationship with Microsoft. Originally, Microsoft came on to work with HBCU Connect and recruit online by having job postings on our website, by sending out email announcements to our members. But then Microsoft came to us and said, hey, it's great that we have folks that come to our website and apply for jobs, but as I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, you might not always want to, you might not always be online searching for a job. You might not always want to go to 10 different websites and submit a job application, especially if you are currently working at a company, right? So Microsoft said, they came to us and they said, hey, how can we make sure we get in front of, diverse candidates and African-American candidates and HBCU graduates? How do we get in front of them and make sure that we have a conversation that can lead to a potential interview and lead to, a hire and a conversation? So they put that ball in our court to solve that challenge. We came up with the idea of doing recruitment events specifically for our audience and our candidates. And then Microsoft would invite their recruiters. Microsoft would invite their team members, to represent the teams that are hiring, and then also hiring managers. And then we could have a networking session physically in different parts of the country to allow Microsoft to interface with African-American talent. So we did that about 8 years ago. We started doing physical recruitment events all over the country up until this year, or I'm sorry, last year, we did more events than we actually have done in the history of our partnership, with probably 10 or 11 events in 2020. But of course, in 2020, COVID hit, and we went from doing these events, at physical locations to doing these events online, right? So that allows us to invite people from outside of, the typical physical locations where we might be recruiting, to offer you the opportunity to meet Microsoft, to talk to Microsoft, and then potentially land an interview and get hired for Microsoft. So that's my pitch, and that's the opportunity for you. There's no better pleasure for me than to introduce someone who actually is sort of a product of this, this collaboration and this partnership that we have had with Microsoft through these events. So I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Philip Drama. Philip is a principal program manager in carrier operations within Microsoft 365. I'll let Philip go into the background of what he is now doing at Microsoft. But the cool thing for me, as the CEO of HBCU Connect, I work really hard to pull these events off. Like I said, we were doing these events physically before. We invite people to the events. We hope they show up. We hope Microsoft is able to make good connections and hire folks. And one of the events that we did was in Seattle. So Seattle is is the Pacific Northwest. Maybe the African-American community is not as large in Seattle. So there were some challenges that were presented. So we did all of the hard work to find, talent in the area and invite that talent to an event that we hosted in Seattle for the first time. And Philip was actually one of the people that we reached out to on LinkedIn. And I believe it was probably me that reached out to Philip and invited Philip to come and learn more about Microsoft at that event. And I believe that event was probably 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago that we invited Philip to that event. And Philip just started working for Microsoft last year. in 2020. But from that first event where we first engaged and invited Philip to one of our events, Philip also participated in some follow-up events that we had with Microsoft, because sometimes it's about making sure that we find the right fit for you as a candidate, and then making sure we find the right fit for the different teams within Microsoft that have different hiring needs for folks with different backgrounds. So the more you are engaged with us and you come to these types of events, the chances are that we may find the right fit for you. So we thank you for being here. We thank Philip for taking the time out to talk about his experience and his path to Microsoft. But I'm very proud to say that Philip is a product of having attended these events and then being interviewed and then hired on to work for Microsoft last year. So Philip, if you're ready, and these are some pictures of Philip that I pulled, unbeknownst to Philip. I pulled these pictures from that actual event to show that this is real. He was actually at one of our hiring events, and I'll turn it over to you, Philip.
Oh, thank you so much, Will. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. And I actually remember that first hiring event. It was raining, cats and dogs. It was totally crazy, but it was a super exciting event. And yeah, it was great to meet with the hiring managers there. And it was also great to get, some ideas about what kind of roles that Microsoft was looking for at that point in time. So yes, as Will said, I joined Microsoft last year. So I'm kind of a rookie right now, still in Microsoft. And I joined as a role where I'm a principal program manager. I'm heading up a function which is called Carrier Service Management within the IC3 organization. And of course, that might not tell you anything when I come with all those things. So the IC3 organization in Microsoft, it stands for Intelligent Conversation and Communication Cloud. And that basically means that part of the organization is dealing with the communication services for services like Skype, like Teams, like Azure Communication Services, and basically providing good productivity tools, good communication tools, and making calls better, making chat services, and all communication that you have actually. So my role is I'm working with different operators around the globe, everything from operators in Japan, Australia, India, Europe, US, of course. And as a company, Microsoft is purchasing services from these companies. So I'm kind of dealing with the relationship, dealing with the ongoing operations and services that we are buying from these companies. And I have a small team, lean and mean team. So I have people in Europe working for me. I have people in the US working for me. And we are growing as a team and, of course, as an organization as well. A little bit about myself and my background then. I mean, I have 20 years of experience from the telecom industry, where I worked the last 7 years before joining Microsoft in a company called Ericsson. And Ericsson is one of the biggest telecom vendors in the world, who is providing all kinds of equipment to carriers and operators, for example, 5G network, IoT networks, and so on. Ericsson is providing radio equipment and switches and all kinds of things that you can imagine has to do with communication. And I have also worked 11 years for a European telecom operator, Tele2. I have owned my own company for a while as well, which I built up, which was also focusing on telecommunication services. So about 5 years ago, I got the opportunity to move to the US. And I did that in a role within Ericsson, where I was heading up a big, massive, I would say, digital transformation program towards T-Mobile. At the peak, we had about 700 people in this program. And it was actually, when it was big or at the peak, I was at the top. In terms of revenue, I think that it was one of the biggest IT programs worldwide, actually, because it was a massive transformation. And the whole objective with that program was to deliver a full stack solution, meaning CRM solution with enhancing the digital experience for the end users of T-Mobile by delivering some new technology to them. And I did that for some time. I had a chance in my role here at Ericsson, based in Seattle, close to T-Mobile, to change the ways we worked and the way we developed our product. Because I came at that point in time from a product development unit, and when you work close to a customer, you work in a different way than normally than if you work in the back end with the product development. So what I would say with that is that one thing that I did in my role was I tried to take the product development closer to the customer and creating a way of working which was able to capture customer requirements and at the same time, taking those customer requirements into our product roadmap and making our product roadmap more customer friendly, if I would call it that. Because you people who have worked within product development, you are probably familiar with the view that you have a customer view and then you have a product view. And these two pictures and these two priorities from these two organizations might not all the time align. The customers, they want to have everything, now. It should work perfect from the beginning. It should be, user friendly and all kinds of things. Whereas on the product side, you have people who normally try to look at the broad market and they want to create something, one size fits all. When they have created something and they think that this T-shirt will actually fit everyone, they come out to the brutal reality and they will realize that this T-shirt doesn't fit. So we have to, apply a lot of customizations on it to make it fit. And so what I did in my role was I focused on getting these two processes and this way of working into something that was suitable for everyone, I would say, both from a customer perspective and from a product perspective. A little bit more about myself as well. I mean, as you might notice, I have an accent, and of course that's because I come from Sweden. So you can see here in the back my hometown, Stockholm. You see here, if you see my screen here, this is the city hall actually in Stockholm. So this is normally where you have the Nobel Prize dinner actually in this building. And then this is just a new fancy hotel on this side. So I have, personally, I mean, I have a West African father, I have a Swedish mom. I was born and raised in Sweden, and I have a very big family as well. I have 7 siblings. I'm the oldest one. And actually, I have 5 kids myself as well. So I have continued the legacy to have a big family. I grew up in northern Sweden. I had the opportunity where I grew up. Basically, I went to high school. I went through a technical program in high school, and after that, I joined the military. I did my military service, which is something that back in the days it used to be mandatory in Sweden. I don't think it is anymore, but I did that in a small town, which was even further north up in Sweden, about, I think, 150 miles south of the Arctic Circle. So it's cold always. In the wintertime, it's really cold. In the summertime, it's cold. And I did well when I did my military service. I had no plans for doing anything more with the military after I was done with the military service. But what happened then was I was lucky to be accepted into the cadet school. So I went into the National Defense College in Sweden, where I could study and become basically an army officer after my studies. And I specialized within telecommunication management. And what I did after that, when I got out from the officer school, I had the rank of lieutenant. I started working in the military, and I worked with education, with training. I was implementing a new telecommunication system, and probably if you will look at it now, you would say that what kind of crap is that? Because if you look at the performance and everything you had in that network, it's nothing basically if you compare to how it looks today. But back then it was like the hottest thing you could work with basically in the army. And I did that for a couple of years. I had a friend of mine who worked for a European telecom operator, and somehow he referred me into this, and I was able to get a position there. I joined that company, and that was actually Tele2, as the head of the network operations center. So I had a small team of 12 people working 24/7 with operating the telecommunication network for this operator. And after about a year, my manager at that point in time, he decided to retire, and I got the opportunity to take on his role, which was basically to lead a department of 4 teams, 50 people, 2 sites, and I was 27 years old basically at that point in time. So I had a super interesting career in the beginning, and after that I had a number of other roles as well. I got more taste of going into an international career because I worked with telecom operators all around the world in that role, and it was really fun to work in that kind of environment. I got super inspired, so after a while I got an opportunity to move to Germany. So I lived in Germany for a couple of years, and I was heading up an IT organization in Southern and Central Europe. I moved to Latvia after a couple of years, and I was able to establish a new organization in Latvia, still within the same company, within the same telecommunication company. And that was really interesting to move from a country like Germany, which has more than 80 million people. It's like one of the biggest economies in the world, to a small country like Latvia, who has 2 million inhabitants. I mean, it's super small if you compare, and it's also part of the former Eastern Europe. So it's a quite interesting, or it was a super interesting experience. I was in Sweden for some years, and then coming back to what I said in the beginning, I got the opportunity about 5 years ago then to move to the US and take on another role. And last year then, the role that I have right now, that was actually a role which was out there on the web page. I applied for it, and I got the opportunity to go into interviews, and finally I was able to land the role. And it's of course super amazing to work in a company like Microsoft that is changing the world basically. And it's super interesting to work within the team space, which has had a boost, of course, since the COVID hit everything. And yeah, I mean, right now I'm super happy to work where I'm working right now. And the colleagues that I have, they're absolutely amazing. I know that we're going to talk about that in a while, but one thing that I really appreciate as well in Microsoft is the way that the company is working with career development. And even though I'm new to the company, I already now have a kind of a career development plan as well that I have discussed with my boss, and in order to set the plans going forward. And it's a lot about owning your own destiny, and owning your own career. I used to think about, Alice in Wonderland, and I don't know, some of you might have read or seen it, Alice in Wonderland, uh, where Alice is running around in Wonderland and she's totally lost. She doesn't know where to go. Then she meets the cat all of a sudden in Wonderland, and she asks the cat basically, "Hey, where should I go?" And then the cat asks Alice, "Where are you going?" And then Alice says, "I don't know where I'm going." And the cat replies, "If you don't know where you're going, then you can go in any direction." So, and that's a little bit, I think, about it as, when you look at career development plans and the way it is, it's a lot about, me as an individual having an objective, having a target, but then to have a good conversation with my boss about, here I am today, and this is where I'm going, and this is what you can do. And this is one thing that I think is amazing with a company like Microsoft, where there are so many resources as well when it comes to building your own career, attending training, attending different events and so on. So with all that said, I mean, this is kind of the introduction, and hopefully you have a number of questions as well.
Well, I always like to ask questions about sort of that path to Microsoft. So you kind of gave us your path from from a high level, but there's a lot of people that come to these events and they wonder, what is it like in the interview process? So if you could touch on what it was like for you, so you're now in a program management, position, right? So what was it like for you to come through the interview process to land a PM role at Microsoft?
Wow, I mean, it was, I was super nervous, first of all, I could say. It was, I mean, during the process, obviously the first step was just to apply and then to get, a confirmation. Yeah, we are interested to meet you. And the first interview I had was with my hiring manager, and that was, a number of questions around what I've done in the past, and probably most focused around me as, as an individual, basically. I mean, to get to know me a little bit more, feeling a little bit on the, soft skills, basically. And then after that, when I kind of passed my hiring manager at that point in time, I was sent into this loop. And that means during that process, I met a number of other people, which all of those guys that I met had, of course, they had the different objective or different roles in the process. And it wasn't clear to me exactly, what kind of role does this person play, but what was clear was that it was a number of, was a kind of heavy process in the sense that very intense, meeting like 4 people within a day and a number of questions, which some things I hadn't even thought about that they were asking in this sense. But the way that I prepared myself was to kind of go through mentally my own kind of, career journey, what I have done in the past. And also I try to have good examples as well when I try to explain something, some important trait, for example, customer focus. I mean, then I try to come with an example. When have I kind of demonstrated that I have customer focus? Or I also thought about, things where it has been challenging. I mean, a challenging customer situation, for example, because often it's like that. It's in the challenging situations that you really will demonstrate whether you're a good fit or you're not, basically.
So another question that I have for you that I think from a candidate perspective. I'm a candidate, right? And I'm interested in working for Microsoft. I come to a hiring event like this, and I'm thinking, okay, what is the hiring process like? What is the interview process like? But then, what if I do get an offer, and what if I do decide I want to work for Microsoft, and we're in the middle of COVID? So you've been at Microsoft and you were onboarded, right? You were onboarded during the pandemic. Am I right, or was it right before?
No, no, it was actually it was in the middle of the pandemic.
So can you talk to us from a candidate perspective, what that was like? Maybe some of the things that Microsoft had to do different to bring you on and get you up to speed. And I imagine you're probably working remote right now.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, I mean that I can tell you that that is kind of a challenge. The good thing is that it was a really good process for how I got for example, I got my equipment. It was sent to my home. I got it, in good time before I joined. And then, of course, I mean, to set up all the equipment and everything, it actually worked amazingly well. I didn't have any issues with the accounts and things like that, which you might have. So that part worked really well. The challenge, I think, to be onboarded during this COVID time is that I'm working with a bunch of people that I have never met physically. I don't even know what they look like. I have no idea. They are like, I just see them like this in the best case. I also, of course, work a lot remote. So I work with a number of people who doesn't live in the country even. They live in Japan, for example. And the only thing that I see there is I only see, a sign on the Teams, and then I know that there is somebody I'm speaking with who is on the other side, basically. But so it's kind of a interesting thing to be onboarded during the COVID situation. But so far it has been good.
So one more follow-up question. So hopefully everybody is on mute. If you're not on mute, please mute yourself. I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback. But one other follow-up question I wanted to ask was around the relocation. So I know when you relocated to the Seattle area, it wasn't to immediately work for Microsoft, but you did at some point have to relocate from somewhere totally different to come to the Pacific Northwest and then work for a company. So what was it like for you to relocate, and what are some of the selling points of living in that part of the country?
I mean, it was really interesting, I would say, because I hadn't been I had been a couple of times, of course, in the US. Most of the time I had been on the West Coast, or sorry, on the East Coast, actually. I went, one of the things was that I had been in Seattle one time, I think, and that was really bad from my perspective, because it was in the middle of the winter, it was raining, it was dark and everything. So I had kind of the impression that if I'm gonna, move to the US, I don't want to move to Seattle. That's just out of the question. But then, I mean, when I moved here and took that decision, I have seen so many great things, actually. I mean, the nature is super beautiful. That's one thing. And I love skiing, for example. So I love to be up in the mountains. And it's like, living in the Alps and living close to the beach as well at the same time. So I really like that. And then, of course, you have the city. I mean, you have a lot of diversity from that perspective as well. When you don't have the COVID, you have a number of super nice restaurants, so there is so much to see and so much to do here. So I really, really like it. And of course, it's close as well. You can go to Canada in 2.5 hours, then you're up in Vancouver and can enjoy that as well. So it's a fantastic place.
So my last question for you. So I know you're in the principal program manager position, and I know we have a lot of PMs. that are interested in landing an interview and a job with Microsoft. But we also have a lot of software engineers that are on with us. So can you talk about sort of how, from, I know you're in a program management role, but then what type of technologies, underneath, your organization or your teams, what kind of technologies are the engineers actually working on?
So I would say that the engineers, it depends, of course, in which area you're working. But if it comes to kind of development and that part, of course, it's a lot of C#, Java, and in particular, in the IC3 organization, since that is very heavily focused on the communication, then we can, you can talk about iOS, you can talk about Android as well. And then, of course, one interesting thing is when it comes to machine learning and BI. I mean, obviously, you have that everywhere, but that's definitely an area within the communication side, which is super hot and super important. Because, I mean, if you look at, for example, how I'm working with different operators around the world, one of the things that is super important is to have good quality in whatever we are delivering and developing. And thanks to having, machine learning and BI as part of this, it's possible to get the best quality out of the communication services. Of course, to add as well to that, if you have, real-time transport protocol experience, if you have experience from PSTN networks or mobile networks, I mean, that's obviously something which is super good as well as skills to have.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to thank you for keynoting and taking the time out. I know you're super busy, but I'm going to ask you to hold on to join us for our panel discussion. So, but with that, I want to thank, like I said, thank you for your opening remarks. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for coming to our events in the past, because without folks showing up, I don't think we could do this. So thank you for that. But and congratulations again on your role there at Microsoft.
Thank you.
Yep. So our next speaker, so I'm going to kind of go into introducing some of the other team members that have volunteered their time. So our next speaker is Parul Manek. So Parul, if you're ready, I will hand over the presentation to you.
Great. So let me talk a little bit about me. I think people look at me and go, well, you've been successful all your life. And I will tell you, I failed all of my exams at school. I hated school. I did not do well at all. And I think to this day, my mother still reminds me of the fact that I failed all my exams. So I was born in India, but I grew up in London, England, and I did my I should say bachelor's in math and master's in artificial intelligence. But I have to say the reasons I picked these topics is not because of the interest. I picked them because I didn't have to write English sentences, because English is not my first language. I learned to read, write, and speak English at 16. And so I had to pick areas where I could be successful without having to know the language to the proficiency level that I know it at today. So it's been a long time coming. But what I want people to kind of take away is that you don't have to be good at everything to make it at Microsoft, right? I think it's one of the key things I will say. I think people look at me today, and I think even my team kind of thinks, oh, you've always been good at what you do. And I kind of continue to remind them we are all humans, and we all it all takes effort for all of us in different ways, but it all takes effort. From a career perspective, I started off as a developer and then became a consultant prior to coming to Microsoft. So I had a 7-year history of working in the industry before I came to Microsoft. And I joined Microsoft to work for 3 years because I wanted to get Microsoft on my resume and move on, right? I had been a consultant, I was a successful consultant, but then I had not worked for a major company. So I came to work at Microsoft for 3 years. After 21 years, I'm still here. And I'm still having fun, and I'm excited about getting up every day and kind of focusing on the change that I can make, not just for the products I worked in, but overall to the company and the culture of the company. So if in my current role, I'm a partner director of program management today. I have a team of about 80 people that are global across 7 different countries. And my broad portfolio essentially includes the features that are used by large enterprises in Fortune 500 companies, as well as working on cloud services and Microsoft 365, which is the team that I sit within. Is one of the cloud services that Microsoft offers. At Microsoft we talk about 3 clouds: the Office 365 cloud, the Azure cloud, and the Dynamics cloud. Right. So most of my focus has been on the Microsoft and the Azure clouds. But as part of that, I also run engineering team that focuses on customer trust, because as we go online, one of the key things that you as an individual, right, ask for is, how are you going to keep my data secure? Right? If I start using your service, can you ensure security, privacy, right? Retention, because I'm a human, I will make mistakes. Will you be able to help me recover through those mistakes, right? So I run a lot of the engineering that goes behind that. So I do a lot of that. As I said, I have a team. Majority of the customers I focus on are large enterprises, but we also do a lot of work for the government. So there has been a lot of questions in the chat regarding the office in Atlanta. We are actually opening an office in Atlanta purely to focus on a lot of the government work. So that's an exciting set of opportunities. In addition to my day job, as I call it, there is a work that I do that contributes to the company culture. Focused on diversity and inclusion, focused on allyship, coaching and mentoring. We have something called employee resource groups at Microsoft, right? So we have Asians at Microsoft, Blacks at Microsoft, women's ERG, or primarily focused on women. Gleam, which is focused on how can I say, the LGBTQ community, right? So we have ERGs that essentially have their own programs, so many of them do the coaching and mentoring. So I participated in a lot of that. In the community, for me, it is really not about just what I do at Microsoft, but it's how am I a good citizen? And at some level, Microsoft enables me to be outward focused as well as inward focused. So I spend a lot of my time with the community as part of the Global Give Back Circle, where I have mentees in the African subcontinent that I focus on to make sure that they continue their interest in STEM and make sure that they can be supported through college. I spend a lot of my time on Ignite panels and working with the Anita Borg Institute, as well as on helping or essentially participating and contributing to the Women in Product, Women in Technology, and Women in Security initiatives, right? So I have a very, very non-orthodox background as such, an early part of my life. And one of the other things I'd say is today I'm a director, but I have taken the path of becoming what we call an individual contributor, where I did not have anybody working for me or reporting to me, to becoming a senior manager and then going back to being an individual contributor. My theory is anytime we change a subject area or a technology, I prefer to go back to being what I call an IC, because it allows me to learn the technology or the product area from scratch. Because as a manager, when you're talking, and your words only have the weight and the authority if you know what you're talking about. So how do you now come in and establish that weight, right? So I have done this round of not just always kind of following the standard trajectory of being a junior program manager to senior to lead to a GPM and or group program manager and then director of PM. I've kind of taken this roundabout way where multiple times I have gone back to being an individual contributor to come back. Right. And it has made me a stronger leader today because I know what people look for in a good manager. Right. So, and as I said, I'm not perfect. Right. But having that level of experience and having to go back and dealing through the feedback that you hear, right? Where a lot of the times when you're a manager and you become an IC, it gets interpreted as a demotion, right? And at Microsoft, we value individual contributions as much as being a people manager, right? So both of them have equal weight.
I love that personally. So I actually come from a software engineering background myself, and the company that I was at AT&T Bell Labs, and the company wanted me to go into the management route, but I was afraid to go into management because I didn't want to lose touch with technology. So I love that you bring that out. You're after doing many of these events, you're the first person to bring out that point. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, how did you go from being a developer, for 7 years and working with technology to going into a PM role at Microsoft?
And I think this is where I think being a developer at some level I find is easier than being a program manager. The main thing that you have to develop as a program manager is empathy, right? Having that empathy for the end customer, empathy for an end user, right, is key, because without that, you are not asking the right set of questions, right? Now, our engineers have empathy too, right? So don't get me wrong, you still need that skill. It's just when I think about going from my development experience to being a consultant to being a program manager, it was more about empathy, where I really wanted to understand the pain points, right? And to be able to address those pain points. Because when you deliver a solution that meets a customer's need and you see that aha moment in their eyes, or when you see that appreciation, it makes all of those late nights, all of the hard work, the blood, sweat, tears that have gone into making something happen, all worthwhile, right? Because it is something that you have changed somebody's perspective. You have changed the way somebody works, right? And I think that's one of the key missions that has kept me at Microsoft, right, over the years. And our current company mission is to empower everyone to do more, right? And to realize their full potential. And then the way you do that is by empathizing and understanding what is needed, right? So I think that is one of the key skills. A lot of this, I think most people kind of think, oh, you go to school for being a program manager, you go to school being an engineer, right? I think you go to school to be a human being, right? And realize that there are human beings on the other side, right? Like we are not machines, right? And for me, when I hire, what I look for really is somebody who's human, who understands the human psyche in terms of what to focus on and what not to focus on, right? And for me, I've hired people with geology degrees, right, who have not had computer science degrees, or I would say literary majors, right? Like one of my leads today, or one of my really good solid leads today, has English literature degree, right? They do not have a computer science degree, because I think what education teaches you is to be able to stay committed to a goal, right? To be able to learn, to be able to think logically, to make the right decisions in whichever profession you decide to take. And when you think about engineering, it is all about logical thinking, right? So what I look for in people is the raw potential that can be developed, right? And if you really look at some of the strongest engineers, it's not the fact that they have computer science degrees. I know people who have computer science degrees who can't write a line of code, right? Or who if you give them an algorithm, they won't be able to figure out what that does, right? But if you have a logical thinking mind, right, and that's the skill you develop, that I think you're ready to be in the software industry.
Love it. I love it. So one of the follow-up questions I had for you was around, for you personally, having been at Microsoft for 21 years, you must like some things about working at Microsoft. But what is it that you like most about working for Microsoft?
What I like the most is the flexibility for me to move around, right? As I said, I came to work at Microsoft for 3 years, right? And I would have left. The thing that I have found at Microsoft over my 21 years, and I could say I have worked at every major division at Microsoft to date, is because every few years I want to go do something different. I want to learn something new, I want to have a broader impact than I've had before. And each time I thought about leaving, I found something else at Microsoft that I liked, right? That I was passionate about, that was heading in the direction that I wanted to go. And I was supported by managers and peers who were able to help me make those moves, right? And one of the things I'll say is I think in all of my time, I don't ever remember applying for a job, right? It is all about people I have worked with, right? People I have worked with, the relationships that I've built, where they would reach out and said, "Hey, Parul, this would be a great role for you. Do you want to come work here?" Right? And I'd be like, "Oh, interesting." And sometimes I wasn't even looking. And I was just like, that's a great opportunity. I should go do this. Right. So I would say the greatest thing that keeps me at Microsoft, right, is the flexibility to pursue my passion and to go do what I want to do.
Love it. So my last question that I like to ask for this segment would be, if I'm a candidate and I'm interested in working on your team, for example, and you had to explain to me what the core responsibility or role that your team plays, and how that kind of boils down to whatever product or service there within Microsoft 365, how would you explain that to me as far as what your team does?
So and I said this as part of my broad portfolio, right? Like I think to make it more real, I have my team who work with customers to understand what it takes for them to onboard to the cloud, right? Like cloud services are flagship services. So I have program managers who'd work with the customers to say, what is holding you back from onboarding to the cloud, right? And we get huge slew of resources, right? Like, oh, your service is not secure. I'm worried about my data, right? So I'll tell you, one of the features that we offer is something called encryption, right? Or encrypted data, right? Where you can come in, you can bring your lock and key, you can lock your data with your lock and key, right? And we'll let you do that, right? And we'll support you in doing that, right? So coming up with these features that will unblock onboarding to the cloud is what I focus on as part of the enterprise features, right? Like today, when you onboard to the cloud, you onboard as a user, right? Or onboard, say you use OneDrive, or you use Teams, or you use Zoom even, right? Like it doesn't matter about any product. You onboard as a single person, right? Over time, you build a family. How many apps allow you to say, now let me build an account that is my family, right? Like, no, everybody is always an individual account, right? In businesses, it's the same, right? You have 5 different businesses, and over time, businesses evolve. There are mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, right? So we build features in the service to support those, right? To support those in the businesses, right? So the program managers I have with do three primary things, I would say. One, which is talking to the customers to understand what their pain points is. Then they bring it back and they work with engineering to say what is doable, right? And what can be done, because not everything that customer wants is something that we do, to be totally honest, right? Because a lot of it is you're in a business, it is all about return on investment. How much investment are you going to make to develop a feature, and what is the return, what is going to be the return on that investment, right? So that we do that analysis, right? And then delivering of that feature, right? And those are the 3 things I expect every program manager in my team to do. And when I onboard new folks, like Philip mentioned earlier on, right? Like I have onboarded a bunch of people in the COVID times, and one of the first things I do when I sync with them and they onboard is I give them a very simple thing, right? Like focus on establishing yourself, right? Because I think one of the things people want to do, and I do want to do the same thing, right, is when you join something new, you want to show your impact, right? And what I always say is take the time, because when you start at a company like Microsoft, the first 6 months, when you get to learn and all you can do is focus on learning, you will never get that opportunity again as you start your career until you change your job again, right? So take your time, learn your technology well, learn your area well, understand the pain points, right? Which is what sets you up for success.
Excellent. So Parul, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to share your experiences, and to also participate in this diversity hiring event with HBCU Connect. So if you would hang on, I'd like to have you as a part of our panel. But with that, I wanted to thank you, and then I'll introduce our next speaker.
Thank you for the opportunity, Will.
Excellent. Okay, so our next speaker, let me adjust my spotlighting. So our next speaker is Bhargavi. So Bhargavi, if you're with us, if you could activate your video and audio, I'll let you take over the presentation.
Sure. Hey, Will, I'm Bhargavi. I own a backend service. I own a backend service on Teams backend. We are the we power Teams, Skype for Business, which is kind of retiring, and I own the audio conferencing component. So the services that my team owns is, like, for example, when you schedule a meeting, right, you can, most of you might have joined the meeting through the VoIP link, right? Along with it, you can always dial into the meeting. That's what audio conferencing is about. So I own the end-to-end services that light up how the phone participants, the PSTN participants, actually get into the meeting. So that's the current services I own. I did my bachelor's back home, back in India. I came to US to do my master's at University of Louisiana at Lafayette. That's where I did back. After I finished my master's, I moved to Seattle. I was doing some small contracting job, and then I just walked into a career event at Microsoft. I pretty much joined Microsoft right out of. So I started as a beginner, like a software developer. At that point, they were like the software developer is in test. I was in the test role. As the roles kind of moved on, and I kind of started working on the product side of it, and then I kind of became an IC software engineer. I've moved different orgs, like it used to be called Skype for Business, Office Communications, or different orgs, but stayed within the realm of IC3. So yeah.
Excellent.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. Yeah, so I want to thank you for jumping on and participating in our event. And on behalf of some of the folks that have a software engineering background, if you can talk a little bit about what it was like to be a software engineer, and then the types of software engineers that you have on your team now.
Sure. So I'm always very curious. Like, my personality is like, I own a bunch of services, but I always want to understand how the whole end-to-end picture works, how the scenario works, right? Because once you understand the whole scenario part, then I think you do a better job in your own role. So the initial part of software engineers, you're working on features, or you're trying to understand how the whole feature works end to end. You're trying to right now, everything that we add, every line of code that we add, we kind of want to measure. We want to measure that we enable this feature in the cloud. How do you figure out the metrics? How is the feature doing? Do I have switches to kind of turn it off, turn it on, enable it at scale? How do I take this feature which is enabled for this small number of tenants to the bigger tenants? So right now, developing, I think, as software engineering has progressed, as each and every product has kind of migrated to the cloud, it's super fun, because you write code today and you kind of actually test with real production traffic with this whole flighting mechanism, and you get feedback. The feedback mechanism is increased. So I think it's become the life of a software engineer's life has become much easier compared to what it used to be before, right? Compared to when we used to ship a software on a CD, right? The amount of tests that the engineer, like that's the reason I think the whole culture has changed. We went from software design, where we used to have a section of SDETs and SDs. Now it's all engineering. You own everything. You own the DevOps model of it. You write code, you make sure it actually publishes, goes to prod. You kind of ensure it's actually, now every customer gets it, and you own the whole entire end-to-end process of it. Yeah, I think it's much, the feedback mechanism always helps you kind of iterate faster.
So for your team now, what technologies, what languages do they use, and what technologies do they work with, and what do you look for?
Right. So we primarily use C#. Most of it is our managed code. We use Azure technologies like, Azure. So our services are kind of deployed on Service Fabric based infra from Azure cloud. But there are a bunch of services that, like, we also own, like my team also owns, like, a web page that, for example, how do you dial into your meeting? Like figuring out the local dial-in number. Like, if you have the invite, you can go click on the dial-in page at the bottom and you kind of figure out, okay, I am working from East Coast this next week. So that part is that technology, like we host it as a web app, right? Basically that's like it's an app service that is it's an app service that is instead of you get your own service space instead of having actually the cores that go with it. So we host, our technologies are basically Service Fabric and web app, but we have bunch of cloud apps. It's mainly Azure technologies and C# managed code, most of it.
And then how large is your team, and where is everyone based that's on your team?
Right. We have my immediate team is like, we are in Redmond, and we have a counterpart in Tallinn as well. For a bigger team, we also have a bunch of folks working in Vancouver. Our Vancouver location is actually expanding quite a bit as well. Our Redmond location is also expanding, and even the Tallinn, Estonia folks are also. So actually, it works out very well because we can just follow the Sun model for our DevOps and on-call model. Earlier, so that works out very well. Yeah. That's mostly how the team is distributed for IC3.
And then for you personally, what is it that you like most about working for Microsoft?
I think within Microsoft, there are multiple things, but the thing that gets me really going, I think, is M365 especially. We have this whole concept of, I don't know if somebody touched base upon this, we have this 3 weeks that we get, like fix, hack, learn. Every quarter, roughly, there is a week that we can take away, like, we can put it on the side, like it's from our day job, and, go fix something that has been annoying you in your day-to-day engineering practices, or, go hack something, like, maybe you're working on IC3 stack, but I really wanted to go check out some Cortana feature, or something completely off your day-to-day job. And that week, or maybe it's just like you want to read up about what's coming next in .NET Core that you can use for your product or your features, right? So that the ability that itself, right, that I can actually turn off my day-to-day job and still be on the job and go learn something, go hack, fix part. And M365, like there's a whole company level, and we also have like this M365 does, like END actually does, like every quarter. So that is like amazing. I feel I always ask my folks in my team to go use that time to go figure out, and people across the company, they come together, they put together, there are these projects you can just go figure out, you can join an existing project, you can go work on that. That's one thing. The other thing that I really love is everybody is looking out. Like, I have my own so I have, of course, my chain of management that's always vested in me, right? But it's just not that. I think it's all your managing peers that are always looking out to make sure how people can grow based, like, the work that you're doing, how the other folks can reuse. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. It's very you always have a tendency to go right from the scratch. You kind of, I created this kind of a thing, but reusing other people's code is a skill in itself, according to me, right? How you can write so that, of course, your team implemented it, but because of what I wrote, other teams could save time. That reusability part, and then always looking out for those options is also a great thing, actually. Those are the two things that I would like to call out. Yeah.
Excellent. So Bhargavi, I want to thank you for taking the time out to share your experiences. And then for all of the candidates out there that are software engineers that might have some questions, please ask those questions in the chat. And Bhargavi, if you could keep your eye on the chat for any of those software engineering related questions, I'd appreciate it. But next, we're going to actually go into the panel discussion. So you can leave your video on, and I would ask that Philip and Parul, if you would turn your video on as well. I want to ask you all some general cultural questions about Microsoft, and we can have a little discussion. And then also, I want to introduce, so I'm going to turn off the spotlight right now.
Oh, and Will, we have Rosa Swaby in the audience as well.
I'm sorry, what was the name?
Rosa Swaby.
So Rosa, if I could quickly introduce you and just get your title there at Microsoft.
Hey, so I actually work pretty closely with Bhargavi and Philip as well in IC3, and I work as a program manager.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us, Rosa. And then quickly, just so people can kind of know who's going to be on the panel, if Rosa, if you could give us sort of your path to Microsoft and sort of how you ended up working for Microsoft, that would be great.
Of course. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'll keep it really quick. I graduated from NYU with a computer science degree. I actually first went into front-end engineering. So I was a front-end engineer at American Express for around 2 years. I worked on the homepage team, specifically working with React. And I switched to product really recently. So I just joined Microsoft late last fall. And I actually have to thank Jesse and Rob for a lot of help there with recruitment and with keeping in touch with me. So I'm very grateful to them for all of their help in the recruitment process. Yeah, so I just joined the IC3 team as a PM.
Perfect. And then that's a great segue for Rob. So Rob, if you want to jump on and introduce yourself, and I have a slide that if you ask me to explain it, I can say I can identify a couple of recognized teams on this slide. But if you want to give a quick overview of this slide, that'd be great as well.
No, absolutely. I know Microsoft is, I call it one big jigsaw puzzle. I still learn. I imagine everybody on this panel is still learning Microsoft, and you will never learn Microsoft. So hopefully this will kind of put some of the puzzle pieces together for everyone kind of to see. That's why I think it's definitely important to kind of share this. So you can see everybody on the, oh, lost the video. Is it still there?
Let me bring it right back up. Let's see.
Okay.
All right, should come back up.
All right. So on the top panel is basically our Microsoft's senior leadership team. There's, Satya is obviously in the first box there. There's a lot of people, a lot of different groups. From there's HR, there's finance, there's business development, there's HR. I'm under Kathleen Hogan. Then there's basically 5 distinct engineering teams. Now it's doing down to 4 engineering teams. But the first one is Kurt Delbeni, and that's basically more strategic. There's some system admins, tech support, so there's a little splatter of people in that group, smaller in size. Then you have Scott Guthrie, which is the giant at Microsoft. There's literally close to about 57,000 people in that particular engineering org. I liken it to be like more of the back end of Microsoft. So you think of the cloud, everyone that I don't see, like the data centers or the Azure platform, AI platform, and everything like that would fall under Scott's world. Then you go into Phil Spencer, which I think a lot of people know. It's basically Xbox gaming. So if you're a gamer, Phil Spencer is your man on that, and that's about 7,000 people in that particular org. Then you dive underneath Kurt, then there's Kevin Scott, and that's basically more of our data science. There's research, AI in there. They do a lot of support for a lot of the engineering teams across the board. Then you go into the fun org. That's ours. Just Rajesh Jha. And that's, again, it's a monster of an org as well. It's probably close to about, I think, 44,000 people last time I checked with that. And that's more of the front end of the web. So everything that people can touch and feel, like, Office 365, Teams, Yammer, can be the hardware sense from, Surface, HoloLens, and all the stuff that people know about will fall under Rajesh. So you want to kind of put the puzzle pieces together. Think of Scott Guthrie's kind of like the engine of a sports car. Then you got the sports car, which is Rajesh, that everyone sees, and it's really cool. That's kind of one you like, the Rajesh Jha team from that perspective. Now, if you break that down further, going into the team itself, obviously, it's in my way, I can see that. But basically, if you look in this aspect of it, the M365 team, Rajesh is big. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure, and the ecosystem is huge. You're dealing with devices, you're dealing with Office, Windows. There's a lot of different areas. And this particular team that you're interviewing for does fall under Perry Clark, which is M365. It's a small section of the E&D infrastructure, but what they really focus on more like bot framework. There's Cortana, the Exchange. Hopefully I'm not missing them. Man, the panel can correct me, but there's Microsoft Teams, obviously, Office 365 on the Exchange side, and Skype for Business. So there's a lot of services that's kind of packed into that. And that's kind of what you're kind of interviewing for, and this team that's going to be part of this panel coming up for. And so you kind of, and again, there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's huge. If we put Microsoft perspectives, there's literally about 325,000 people at Microsoft. Out of that, which I think 170,000 or so. If I don't even know the math anymore. If I think it's if I look at 170,000 are full-time roster agency, interns, vendors, and everything like that. So there's a lot of moving pieces. So again, I know that's one of the questions that get asked a lot. And as for opportunity, you guys will definitely find that's the beauty of Microsoft. We are a software company. Everything's kind of evolving. You can get, and you can see just here, there's so many different products and services you can join. So if you want to learn something new, like Peru, she was a short-term thing that she wanted at Microsoft to put on her resume. 21 years later, she's probably experienced a lot of different orgs and different teams and experiences. You don't have to leave Microsoft to continue to build and grow. And that's the beauty about Microsoft. It's not tied to a certain product or service or anything in regards to that. So that to me is a huge selling point. So if you like to be innovative, you like to grow, and you like to see different things and expand and constantly learn and have that growth mindset where you're working with a lot of smart people, you're building off that, and you're getting ideas from them, blending together, and making everybody grow. It's more of a collaborative, constructive, good company where everyone comes learning and you're constantly learning. So that's kind of my pitch about Microsoft. I guess from that standpoint, hopefully the puzzle piece will put together a little bit better for you, so you know exactly kind of where you're at, where you're kind of intervening into. So think of front end of the web, sports car.
I like sports cars. So hey, no, that's excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my slides. So for everyone that's on the call, you have the Microsoft team here in front of you. So if you want to ask questions, go ahead and ask those questions in the chat. And then I'll ask those questions to the team. So one of the first questions that I saw and comments that I saw was around skill sets that you're looking for program managers, right? Because program managers might have a variety of different backgrounds, come from different types of companies, and they want to get their foot in the door at Microsoft. So I'm going to point this question by default to Peru about what skill sets you look for, from program managers when hiring.
So I want to say something before I answer your question. I'm going to say something to support what Rob just mentioned, right? Like Microsoft is a company where you can move around, right? So when we hire people, we hire for Microsoft, right? Even though a specific group is interviewing you, or you're passionate about a specific group and you interview, as a company, we always hire for the company, right? Because things change. Industry changes, organizations change, leadership changes, right? The business strategy changes. All of these result in a change, right? So if you're hired for a company and if you have the right skill set for the company, you should, the confidence that we have in our hiring process is you should be able to succeed anywhere at Microsoft, right? So we emphasize that, and that's something that I do want to be very clear about, is as you think about it, and I see a lot of questions in, hey, is your team hiring? Is your team hiring? I would say when you get hired at Microsoft, you're a Microsoft hire. You are qualified to be at the company. We see value in the skill set and the diversity and the thought process that you bring into the company, right? Organizations will change, but your success will stay with you as an individual, right? So I wanted to kind of re-emphasize that, Rob, with the statements that you made earlier on. So as we think about the skill set that we look for, right? I think from a program management perspective, and as I said this before, right? Like, first of all, I look for humans, right? Like, I do not want robots. We do not want machines. We do not want people who will execute on a particular process, right? I want people who are different. I want people, what I would say is be who you are. Right? What I really hire is I hire humans. And I know I go back to that statement, but I hire humans who have empathy, humans who have an ability to think logically, people who can walk me through that thought process, right? That's what I look for. I look for raw potential, especially in the first 5 years. If you're an industry hire, you've been in the industry for about 2 to 5 years, right? I would look for raw potential. I do not look for a specific expertise. Right now, naturally, we are good at certain things than others, right? Like people will excel. Like I think I would say if you've been programming in Java or Python for 10 years, and I think people start like kids start coding, right? My kids are 7, right? And they're playing with Scratch. And when I was 7, I did not look at a computer, right? So people start coding a lot earlier, right? So people become experts. People have a niche, right? But when I hire people for their versatility, right? I hire people for their core skill set, but I hire for their versatility, right? Because today I want them to do a job A. Tomorrow, changed on a business strategy, I may want them to do job B, right? So the core skill set I really look for is raw potential, being able to think logically, right? And to be human, right? And I know it's a oversimplification, but those are the core qualities I look for. Everything else for me is bonus, right? Because I think if I have somebody with the right skill set, I can grow them into successful engineers and program managers.
Excellent. Excellent. So a quick question, and I'm going to direct this next question to Rob. So areas where Microsoft 365 is hiring, so locations now, and then maybe locations that'll be opening up in the future.
It's a lot of good question to unpack. Well, obviously Redmond. You got that one. No, there's a good thing about M365. They're definitely expanding and growing. They're open to new ideas to expand and growing. Redmond obviously is there. Vancouver, Czechia. There's Prague area. Actually, that is Czechia, Prague, Tallinn in Estonia. I do know that even IDC, or the Indian distribution center over there. I know we have some people in China. So really, it's really across the globe. Atlanta, as we mentioned earlier, they're starting to expand. It's really, and that's the beauty about what we're doing. It's really trying to get a diverse workforce across the world, because you have different customers that kind of are always kind of using your product. So you have to kind of rate. That's why we are expanding out there, and there's a lot of talent everywhere. So it's really, they are open, and they will adjust accordingly to finding where they go and where the talent's at, and making them think a bit more easier for everybody as well.
Excellent, excellent. So next question, I'm gonna allow Rosa to actually participate, right? So Rosa, I got a question from a PM that asks, what's the day-to-day like, and then what software do you use as a PM to do your job?
That's a good question. Maybe just a few months into the role, I would definitely say day to day, I work really closely with the dev team. So attending stand-up meetings with them. We have these meetings also called ship room meetings, where we track progress for overall projects. Also meeting with stakeholders as well to understand any of the needs or issues that they're facing. We also have, at least within my team, we have a lot of cross projects between different areas. So I would say as a PM, definitely a lot of your day is meetings. But you can also break it up, you can also break it up. And I personally love meetings. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go into product. I love working with people and chatting and learning more about different areas of technology. So you definitely will be working a lot with other people and trying to understand, especially when you're in planning, trying to understand what it is that stakeholders need from you, trying to understand what it is that they're going through and how they're using your technology and how you can make their experience better. So definitely a lot of planning and organization and working with others. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so this is going to be the next question is going to be a two-part question for Bhargavi and then for Philip. So Bhargavi, from a software engineering, recruitment process perspective, is there a coding assessment or coding, part of the interview process for a software engineer? And then for Philip, is there any type of assessment or coding that happens for a PM? So I'll defer to Bhargavi.
So for a software engineer, right, I think Parul mentioned it. It is not the language, right? It's the ability to do problem solving. That is what matters. The fact that you can actually break down a problem into the, into logical breakdown of how you iterate over it. I don't expect somebody to write code for it to work. Mine won't work as well, right? You just work on it. How the person takes that feedback, and if I can. So there are some coding assessments that will ask you some kind of coding algorithm. But of course, as I said C# is what we use for day to day, but language, I think that you can learn for sure. That muscle you can grow. It's the ability, and I know it's ability that I was, when I was interviewing someone as well, it's like if I give feedback, how do the person takes the feedback and it actually improves his code or improves his logic, right? But usually in the interview, they do ask some level of coding questions.
And then for a PM interview process, is there any type of assessment or coding that has to happen for a PM?
Actually, I have not seen that, I would say, from my experience, but what I've seen is obviously a lot of focus on situational questions to determine how you are as an individual and how you are as a person, even though, I mean, of course, there are a number of skills that are kind of taken for given, that you can, you have good coordination skills, you have good skills in organizing, planning, and so on. But I would like to emphasize maybe what Parul said here as well, that a lot about the interview process is actually for a PM to assess, how are you as a human being, basically, and how are you handling different situations. So coming back to what I said in the beginning here, I think one important thing to come into interviews and being prepared is to think through a couple of situations, how you have been handling them, and be able to speak to that and have some good examples.
Excellent. So I'm reading over some of the questions that are coming in. But before I ask the next live question from the chat, I'd like to ask sort of a cultural question that I had as a part of my, my panel discussion questions. And that is, culturally speaking, because when we first started doing these events with Microsoft, it was about allowing people the chance to meet Microsoft employees and talk to Microsoft employees about what it's like to work for Microsoft. Because a lot of people might be intimidated about working for a company as big as Microsoft and as well known and well respected, especially from a technology company. So do any of you have any stories from a cultural perspective about coming over to Microsoft and then being able to be yourself from a cultural perspective? Maybe some experience that you had that you were able to make to determine if it's okay to be yourself at Microsoft. From a cultural perspective. So anybody wants to chime in on that?
Let me start. I will answer that question, right? So when I started at Microsoft 20 years ago, and I want to talk about how Microsoft has changed in terms of culture, right? When I started at Microsoft, I was one of the only females in a team of 40 people, right? And I remember going into a team meeting, and I did not realize until I was in that meeting, I was the only woman, right? And I was asked a status that I did not have because I had been at the company 2 weeks, right? And it's at some level, I think, growing up in a culture, I grew up in India. I grew up respecting authority, right? When somebody senior says do something, right, or something is a specific way, I did not question it. Right. And I remember standing in that room going, and somebody said, oh, go figure out or go get status next time you come to the ship room. And we talked about the ship room, right? When we talk about status of the projects and so on. And I think, and there was a time when I did not speak back. And I think I would say in the last maybe 5 years, right, the company has changed. Company has fundamentally changed in how we ask people, how the questions are asked, and how diversity is something that's seeked out, right? I have people in my team, and you asked me about one of the skills that I look for in hiring a PM. I want somebody who thinks differently than I do, right? I want somebody who will question authority. I want people to question status quo, right? Because that's how we get better. That's how we learn about our blind spots, right? Because as I've said before, right, managers are managers because they've done this for a while, or they're experts or something, right? Or they were appointed as managers, right? And everybody has their blind spots, right? But how do you get over those blind spots? And the only way you get over them is when somebody asks you a question that gets you to self-reflect. Right. So when I look at it from a cultural perspective, even though I grew up in a culture that says respect authority, right, now I do not hesitate when I'm in a meeting and somebody's saying something, whether however senior it is, right? And I would ask the question to say, from my understanding, here's how I think it operates, right? Because I'm coming from where I stand, right? And often at times I will have leaders go, "Oh, that's a good point. We had not thought about that," right? So that is the cultural change that we've seen that is seen at Microsoft, and I think this happens not just from a PM perspective. I see this happen from an engineering perspective. I see this across the board where rather than directing to say do X, right? The question has changed to should we do X? Right. And I think that is the fundamental way I'd like to describe the culture change at Microsoft.
Excellent. So we're just about out of time. So I want to make sure I give Jesse and Rob the last sort of talking points to speak to the process. So I know people are very interested in interviewing. So I'm definitely going to email folks the next steps. But Jesse, I don't know if you wanted to go over it quickly before we close out.
Yeah, definitely. So Will is going to send over an interest form link. In order to be considered, you definitely want to make sure you fill that out. And if you're a software engineer or a technical program manager with 2+ years of experience, you will be reached out to by either myself or someone on my team for an HR screen. And then the next steps would be a technical phone screen with someone from the team. And then folks who pass that will be then set up with a virtual final round interview, which would happen about a month from now. So it's really a 3-step process, but the most important one is definitely make sure you fill out that interest form that Will sends out. And I put it in the chat a couple times as well.
I like your background, Jesse.
Tom Brady, baby.
That's dope. So, hey, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out from the Microsoft team to share your experiences. I want to thank all of the candidates that took time out of your schedules to learn more about Microsoft 365. You will hear from me with next steps, as Jesse described, and then you'll have the opportunity to submit your information. And a lot of people always ask me, do I have any advice or recommendations? One thing that I'm going to advise is tighten up your LinkedIn profile, because one of the questions on that interview interest form is a quick view of your experience based on your LinkedIn profile. So tighten up your LinkedIn profile. We will share your resume with the Microsoft team as well, so they will have that. But that would be the one point that I would recommend as well. And then don't be afraid, as Philip mentioned in his keynote, don't be afraid to go out on Microsoft's website as well to look for positions that might be a really good fit for your background, and then apply online, because as you can see, Microsoft is reviewing talent, and you could get your foot in the door that way as well. So any last words from Rob or Philip as our keynote before we adjourn?
All right, sorry, some technical.
Okay, yeah, I think you're on mute, Philip. Uh-oh. Okay, so technical, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yep. I think you muted again. It's unmute again. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So what I tried to say was one of the benefits with working in Microsoft is that you get to try out all this new technology. And that's what I did just now. So last words for me is basically, just apply and go all in and, be prepared. And I'm sure that I hope that we will meet one day somewhere in Microsoft.
Excellent, thank you. And Rob, if you wanted to add anything?
Yeah, no, from my perspective, Microsoft it's a fun and awesome company. If you have that passion to want to learn and that drive and just a great people and great culture, Microsoft is definitely the place. I didn't know what to expect when I first started with Microsoft, and I love it. And not every day, I would literally hit that alarm. I don't even hit the alarm clock and drudge getting out of bed. It's one of those companies where it is fun. If you want to personally develop, like I think Garvey mentioned, so if you want to kind of just have a personal passion about some kind of pet project that you want to work on, and we have a garage that you can go and you can do some fun experiments or whatever, you can just do that. The managers allow you the growth and the leadway to actually expand yourself. So it's one of those things. It's not really top down driven. I guess it's more of a company employee driven, team driven. So definitely apply and come on board.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, thanks again to all of our panelists. Thanks to everyone that took time out to attend and learn more about Microsoft 365. And keep an eye on your email, where I'll be sending you the interview interest form link. I'll also be sending you the recording of this presentation in case you missed any part of it. All right. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone joining us, and best of luck to you in the interview process. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.